All right, before we get started, I just want to do a check-in with staff and with John to make sure that everybody's ready to go, and we'll give it a minute and get started.
Thanks,
Ready,
Joe.
Mr. Chairman.
Excellent. With that, we can move on to our next agenda item for the afternoon as we reconvene here with just the council. And we will go to John Almeida, the NOAA Fisheries General Counsel, for the legal review, financial disclosure, and recusal training. So whenever you're ready, John.
Thanks, Joe. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, you sound great.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 2026 briefing on council members' financial disclosures and recusal requirements. Where we get new council members on board every year and where some of the points here get kind of tricky, I think it's a good idea to walk through this every year. Next slide, please. At their core, the government ethics statutes and regulations are about ensuring that public officials place public interest over private gain. Taxpayers reasonably expect that public officials are not in their positions for their own private interests, and the framework we have in place helps ensure that that happens. It's important to recognize that federal ethics regulations are not the same as our everyday understanding of ethics, which are based on personal moral codes. The federal ethics regulations are strict rules that everyone must follow, regardless of whether we personally believe that we can be objective in our decision making. Next slide, please. The statutes and regulations are very strict for federal officials when it comes to working on matters in which the official has a personal financial interest. And this slide shows the default standard, which is that we cannot do it. And if we do, we face criminal or civil penalties. Council members are considered federal officials for purposes of ethics rules, federal ethics rules. Next slide, please. The Magnuson-Stevens Act, however, provides council members with an exception to the blanket prohibition that you saw on the last slide. The blanket prohibition on working on matters where the official has a personal financial interest. The reason for this is because in setting up the council system, Congress decided that it wanted to have folks with expertise in fisheries management. And if the strict default standards applied, we likely wouldn't get that expertise. Next slide, please. Section 302J sets up the requirement that council members must disclose their financial interests and must recuse themselves from voting on matters where there would be a significant and predictable effect on their financial interests. This standard is different from the default standard that we saw a few slides ago. Under the default standard, there's no involvement allowed by a federal official where there's anything above a minimal financial interest. Here, Magnuson standard allows for involvement by a council member as long as it doesn't have a significant and predictable effect. Congress presumably did this in order to ensure that there are people with experience and expertise sitting at the council table working on fisheries issues, as the default standard will generally require a lot more recusals. As this slide notes, this is the standard that applies to appointed council members, not to NIMFs or state officials. Next slide, please. Disclosure of financial interest is the key to the Magnuson ethics framework. Disclosures put everything out in front so members of the public can understand where council members are coming from, which fisheries they're involved in, what companies do they work for or own. Disclosing your involvement allows your participation in discussions and deliberations, even in a situation where a matter would have significant and predictable effect on the council member's interest. Next slide, please. So whose interests must be disclosed? Your own, your spouse's, your minor children's, your partner's, and any organization where you serve as an officer, director, trustee, partner, or employee. In this context, the word partner means business partner as opposed to a romantic partner. As for the timing of disclosures, we need them annually by February 1st. When you join the council, it needs to happen within 45 days. But if things happen during the year and things change, we need to get revised disclosures within 30 days. This last point is important because things can and do change over the course of the year. People change jobs, other things happen, and we need to update those disclosures within 30 days. Next slide, please. The failure to disclose or providing false disclosures are both violations of Magnuson, which can result in civil penalties, permit sanctions, and removal from the council. This could also result in the provisions of Section 208 kicking in, meaning potential civil or criminal penalties. So that caption at the top of this slide, "Don't hold back or lie," is very important. Next slide, please. There are three general categories of required disclosures. The first is the most common one we look at, and that's the ownership or employment in a company or vessel engaged in a fishery managed by the council. The second is employment in an organization whose members are engaged in a fishery managed by a council. And the third is an ownership or employment in a company that owns or is owned by another company engaged in a fishery managed by the council. And this third category, relating to indirect ownership, gets to some of the more complicated situations and calculations that I'm going to discuss later on in the presentation. There are two other categories that don't appear on this slide, and they're less common. And those are, first, the employment or ownership in a company that provides essential equipment services for a fishery managed by the council. And second, employment or ownership in a company that provides representational, consulting, legal services for other companies or vessels providing essential services or involved in the harvest, processing, marketing, lobbying, advocacy for fisheries managed by the council. Next slide, please. So the information on council members' employment or ownership interests are used to determine if the thresholds are met, such that there's a need for recusal from voting. Recusal means not participating in voting. It's not the same as abstaining. Next slide, please. So with a finding of a conflict of interest, a council chair cannot allow a conflicted member to vote. But such members are permitted to state for the record how they would have voted. And maybe more importantly, recused members are permitted to participate in deliberations after notifying the council that they're going to be recused and identifying the interest that led to the recusal. Next slide, please. NOAA GC will make the recusal determinations, and in doing so, we will rely on the information provided in the financial disclosure form, along with other reliable and probative information. This review can and often does involve discussions with the affected individual. Next slide, please. So how do these recusal analyses get started? Typically, it's by the request of a council member, but they can come about by NOAA GC initiating the process as well. Chris and I will typically talk before a council meeting if there's a pending issue that might, initiate questions that might lead to analysis. And I would urge council members to contact me if they have a question, and the more lead time, the better. Next slide, please. Okay, we're going to get into what does the analysis take us to, and what are the questions we need to answer. So when is a recusal required? You'll see the answer here and note the bolded phrases. Magnuson tells us that recusal is required when there's a council decision that would have a significant and predictable effect on the financial interests that's required to be disclosed. So remember that phrase, significant and predictable effect. Next slide, please. So there are 4 steps here, and if any of these questions give you a no answer, then there's no need for recusal. So we'll walk through the steps in the next couple of slides. Next slide, please. The first step, the first question, is there a council decision? The regulations define council decision as you see on the slide. The approval of an FMP or an FMP amendment, request to a regional administrator for changes to regulations, finding of emergency and request for emergency action, and comments on a secretarial FMP or FMP action doesn't fit into any of these categories, then there's no further analysis needed. Next slide, please. Okay, so significant and predictable effect. This is one of the phrases from a few slides ago. It's defined as a council, so the council decision with a significant and predictable effect is one that could require recusal. And the statute tells us a significant and predictable effect is when there's a close causal link between the council decision and an expected and substantially disproportionate benefit to a council member's financial interest relative to the financial interests of other participants in the fishery. Again, the 2 highlighted phrases are defined in regulation. Next slide, please. A close causal link is defined as when a council decision would be reasonably expected to directly impact or affect the financial interest of an affected individual. The regulations flesh this out a bit, telling us that where there are implementing regulations for a council decision, generally there's a presumption of a close causal link. But when there are no implementing regulations, there's a presumption that there's not a close causal link. The exceptions to these presumptions obviously hinge on the facts of the situation. You could have a situation where there's regulations, but it's unlikely or speculative that they'll have a causal connection. And then in that situation, there won't be a close causal link. And you could have the flip side as well. Next slide, please. Okay, now the phrase an expected and substantially disproportionate benefit is defined in the regulations as a positive or negative impact with regard to a council decision that is likely to affect a fishery or a sector of a fishery in which the affected individual has a significant financial interest. Next slide, please. So what is the significant financial interest? This is basically the magic number of greater than 10% interest in the harvesting, marketing, or processing of a fishery affected by a council decision, or ownership of greater than 10% of the vessels using the same gear type in the fishery that's affected by a council decision. So that's a pretty straightforward number, 10%. Next slide, please. Okay, so how much of an interest do we impute on a council member? This is the question of attribution. We'll look at 4 common situations here. The first 2 situations are pretty straightforward. The second 2 can get complicated. So for direct ownership, if a council member has direct ownership in a company, the percentage of ownership in the company will be used to calculate how much interest a council member has in the fishery. So if council member Bob owns 10% of a company that has a 50% interest in harvesting a particular fishery, council member Bob will be attributed 5% of that fishery. So that's 10%, that Bob's 10% ownership applied to the 50% stake in the fishery, that gets you the 5%. When it comes to employment, it's full attribution. So all of the council members' employer's interests will be considered for recusal purposes. So same situation. If Councilmember Bob works for a company with a 50% interest in the fishery, as an employee, Bob will be attributed the full 50% in that fishery. For indirect ownership, you have a company with ownership in another company, it's proportional. So if Councilmember Bob owns 50% of a company and that company owns 50% of a second company, then Councilmember Bob will be attributed with 25% of the second company's interest. So if that second company harvests 50% of a fishery, then 25% of that 50% gets you to 12.5%. So then the last example is parent ownership. So a company that owns another company that owns part of a council member's company. In that situation, it's full attribution if the parent company owns 50% or more. So if Councilmember Bob's company is partially owned 50% by Councilmember Bob and by a second company with a 50% stake, then Councilmember Bob will be attributed with all of the second company's interest. So if that second company harvests 10% of a fishery, then Councilmember Bob will be attributed with that 10%. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is an important point. If there isn't a specific percentage of ownership known or listed on your disclosure forms, the presumption is going to be 100% ownership. And as we get further into this, you see why this is important and why you should always have an accurate percentage of ownership interest. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a situation where someone is employed by a fishing organization or association. There's no attribution from other members' fishing activities. So if your fellow members, their activities won't be attributed to you. But if the association itself engages in a fishery, then the association's activity would be attributed to the council member. Now, as far as the ownership interests of a spouse, a partner, or a minor child, we use proportional attribution as described earlier. But with the employment of a spouse, minor, child, or partner, that doesn't get attributed to the council member unless the compensation fluctuates. So like if your spouse works for another fishing company, that wouldn't get attributed, the full amount wouldn't get attributed to the council member unless the compensation fluctuates based on the financial performance of the company. So if it's a straight salary or an hourly wage, that doesn't get attributed to the council member. But if compensation is tied to how the company does, then it does get attributed to the council member. Next slide, please. So again, what is the implication of being recused from a decision? You can participate in the committee process. You can participate in the process and the motions leading up to a final decision. And you can even participate in discussions and deliberations on a vote for a final action. You just need to announce your recusal, and then you can participate and even announce how you would have voted if you weren't recused. Next slide, please. So there's one more basis for recusal, but this one is pretty rare in application. So if the council is considering a matter that's primarily an individual concern of a council member, then a council member must be recused and can't even participate in deliberations. So this is different than the typical situation I just described. Again, this is rare. This would be something like a grant or a contract that would be awarded to a council member, and that would require recusal under this section of the regulations. And in this situation, the council member can't participate in the deliberations. And I think we can all understand why that makes sense in this circumstance. As far as a fishery decision where this type of recusal would take place, it would be, again, this would be a very rare circumstance, and it would have to be a fishery with very few participants, or an issue in a fishery that could only affect a few companies, and one of those companies was owned or operated. or employed, owned by or employed a council member. Next slide, please. Now, if you disagree with a recusal determination, you can appeal it through NOAA General Counsel. And again, the earlier you start the process, the better, because NOAA General Counsel has 30 days to decide on an appeal. And if we don't begin the process until right before a council meeting, it could be too late. And as the slide notes here, the reversal of a recusal determination doesn't undo a council vote that's already happened. So, to the extent we think that there might be an issue, the more time we have to hash it out, the better. Next slide, please. Okay, when recusals happen, they're typically done on the record at the council meetings. But the agency also provides this information in an annual report to Congress with information on these recusal decisions. Next slide, please. Okay, here's a few resources relating to recusal issues. And Shelley put frequently asked questions document into the meeting materials, which I think is a very good starting point for the, if you want to get your hands around these questions. And of course, anytime you have these questions, feel free to reach out to me and we can work through them together. I appreciate the council giving me the time to cover this. And if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, John. Any questions for John from council? Okay, not seeing any, John. So I think that holds. That means that was a well done presentation. But obviously, any questions or follow-ups, please reach out to NOAA General Counsel on this, and I'm sure John can get any of those questions answered for you. And with that, I believe we can move on to our next agenda item. As mentioned previously, the updates on recreational fisheries issues will be a meeting that we are doing with the ASMFC Policy Board. We've got quite a few issues that'll bring us through to later in the afternoon here. And so I'm going to look to Bob Beal for an intro on behalf of the Policy Board, and if he's got any instructions for board members. Bob?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it. I don't have a lot to add. A couple quick things, though. One is I'm chairing because the chairman of ASMFC is unfortunately at the funeral services for the captain of the vessel that went down in New England last week. And Doug Haymans is online, but he's asked me to chair, given this is a joint process that I've been through a lot, and he felt it was okay if I stepped in as chair. So I think, Joe, you'll probably take the lead on most of the questions and raised hands, but when we get to votes and other things, we'll work together on those. So other than that, I think I don't have any other instructions or introductory comments. So thank you all for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. I appreciate that. And obviously with a heavy heart on the circumstances for the chair not being able to make it. And just, I hadn't mentioned that earlier, but our hearts go out to, the families that lost members and to the community as a whole. I appreciated New England Council's comments and as well as Massachusetts governor on that. So let's get into our updates here. I believe we're starting with the MRIP fishing effort survey revisions, and we will go to Dr. Catherine Papakostas.
Hi, everybody. Can you all hear me?
Yes, you sound good.
Okay, great. Well, thank you to the council for having me. I was sorry to not be able to provide an update to you at the October meeting when you had invited me, and thank again Jason Didden for delivering the update on our behalf at that time regarding our efforts to improve the fishing effort survey, the MRIP fishing effort survey. Since October was a bit ago, I'm going to briefly recap what you heard then to just refresh everyone's memory, and then I'll give you an update on new developments since then and our current timelines. I also have a set of questions that council staff shared with me that were asked at the last meeting. So I'll go ahead and walk through those and answer those for you all. And then if there's time, I'll take any other questions you might have either here, or if we run out of time, we can take, feel free to email me. So we conducted a large-scale study throughout 2024 to test a revised fishing effort survey design that was aimed to improve the accuracy and timeliness of our effort estimates. We tested a couple key design changes. So first was revising the question order. The sequence of fishing activity questions were changed to improve reporting accuracy that a prior pilot study suggested was a source of reporting error. We also increased the frequency of administration. So the revised FES design was mailed monthly as opposed to the original FES, which was mailed every 2 months. And then with the revised FES, we have both a split reference period in the questionnaire, and we use composite estimation to produce the effort estimate. So hopefully I'll explain that and it'll make sense. But so the split reference period, the original FES asks 1 2-month question, and then the 2024 experimental questionnaire separated those out into 2 individual 1-month questions. So then with administering the survey monthly, but asking about 2 individual months every mailing, we have 2 independent samples for each reference month, and we use those to composite. And that's generally known to help improve precision and stability of estimates. That's why we decided to pursue that. As far as the results, the experimental estimates were generally lower than the original FES estimates. The differences were most pronounced for private boat fishing mode. There was also a seasonal pattern with the findings, with the differences more pronounced during the lower fishing activity months and less pronounced during the summer, where fishing activity is typically higher. And so as of October, where we left off, we were planning to implement this revised design in 2026 on established regional schedules pending the outcome of the design peer review and the calibration peer review. So fast forward to now, the developments since the last update. Yeah, I'm sorry, Bob. It's just a verbal update. I don't have slides. So since October, the peer reviews of both the survey design and the calibration model have been completed. For the revised design, a desk review was conducted by the Center for Independent Experts this fall. We received the review reports a little after we returned from the shutdown in late November and early December, around there. The review outcomes were favorable. The reviewers agreed that the revised design offers improved utility compared to the original design for stock assessment and fishery management decisions. Specifically, they highlighted that the revised design addresses this known source of reporting error in the previous design, which, by removing error, in turn improves accuracy of the effort estimates. So having that independent evaluation complete and relatively unanimous, it gave us the green light to move forward with the revised design this year. For calibration, given the systematic differences between the original and revised FES estimates, we developed a calibration model that was peer reviewed in September via an open workshop that we announced in the Federal Register. A number of you attended that. It was conducted through the Center for Independent Experts, and the workshop was chaired by your SSC chair, Dr. Paul Rago. We're really grateful for his expertise there. And then due to the shutdown, so that happened right before the shutdown, then we were a little delayed receiving the individual Center for Independent Experts review reports, but we did get those eventually in mid to late December, and they were relatively favorable as well. The panel confirmed that the model is state-of-the-art. It fully handles the complexity of the survey data. They did have some recommendations for fine-tuning, which the team immediately began to work on and are still, working through that. So updated next steps. So we have a lot of materials that are pending release to you all. We have the final 2024 study report that goes into all the detailed comparisons of the revised FES design to the original. We have the calibration methodology. We have all the associated peer reviews. We also have a transition plan that kind of at a high level lays out the process that we worked on in collaboration with our state and council and commission partners. So those have all been finalized. They're undergoing the final stages of internal review by our NOAA policy team prior to their release. And as soon as that's complete, we'll post on our website, and I'll also send out via email to all the relevant councils. Regarding calibration, the fall shutdown has impacted our schedule for making a calibrated time series available. So we were originally targeting, as I'm sure you all are aware, we were targeting spring 2026. Now we're looking at a summer 2026 release. And we recognize, the critical importance of this timeline for upcoming management decisions and assessment schedules, and are working diligently to complete the work as fast as we can. And we'll provide additional updates and information as soon as we're able to. So that's what I have for updates. I can walk through the questions that were provided to me from you all that you asked at the October meeting. So the first one was, to some degree, license compliance equals FES coverage. Do you regularly check in with Mid-Atlantic states on compliance rates or use part of the dual frame to check license compliance? So while we don't conduct routine compliance monitoring, we do periodically examine trip distributions across licensed and unlicensed households in the FES, and we share that with the states to help them assess and improve compliance. Ultimately, the responsibility for improving compliance with state licensing requirements rests with each state. I'll also just make a minor, maybe a little in the weeds technical note, but license compliance and the coverage of the FES aren't synonymous necessarily. The FES uses that household address-based sample and uses the state license information as auxiliary data to stratify the sample. And this is because of those differences in compliance rates and exemptions and requirements state to state. And so that approach allows us to maintain pretty good coverage. The thing that the license compliance helps with the most with the FES is sampling efficiency. So, the better those sample frames are for us, the more efficient our survey will be. So the next question was, why do you think there was not more of an effect on shore modes with the new FES design, given how big the original shore increases were? So the results from the 2024 pilot indicated that the two questionnaire design changes, so switching the question order and splitting the primary reference period, had opposite effects on effort estimates. So switching the question order reduced fishing prevalence relative to the original FES for both fishing modes, while splitting the reference period into individual months actually increased mean trips per fishing household with a larger increase for shore fishing. And so comparisons with earlier pilot studies suggest these effects are attributable to specific design features. One explanation could be related to the differences in the nature of the respective fishing activities that can affect recall. But we would need to study it further to get you a really definitive answer there. Third question was, what should we expect for precision trends in 2026? And it had two parts to it. So part A was, does the new design affect precision? And so the answer to that is yes. There is a small improvement to precision of effort estimates with the revised design due to our use of composite estimation that improves precision as well as stability. What that means for the catch PSEs, we expect a similar or slight increase in the precision of catch PSEs to really meaningfully improve the precision of the catch estimates. We need to improve precision of the intercept survey. It's not, linear. The improvements to effort precision doesn't directly translate to the equal amount of improvements to the catch estimates themselves. That would come more from the intercept survey. The second part of the question was, what is the 5-year trend in sampling numbers in the Mid-Atlantic by federal versus state supplemental? So in regards to state supplemental sampling, there isn't state supplemental sampling for FES, but a couple states do it for the Access Point Angler Intercept Survey. In the Mid-Atlantic, there's 2 states that do that. It's New York and Delaware. Delaware nearly matches the federal allocation, effectively doubling the sample allocation over the federal baseline. New York began adding supplemental sampling initially in 2023, and they have about a 5% increase to the federal baseline. In the other states, the only sampling is the federal baseline. So between New York and Delaware's contribution to the regional intercept sampling effort, it's about a 15% contribution. And then the last question was, will we get adjusted and unadjusted numbers for the species that haven't gone through assessments with new data until they do get into the new currency? So the short answer is yes. So just like the previous transition where we made the CHTS-like estimates available upon request, the original FES estimates will also be provided upon request. So, you will be able to have access to those. So that's all I have. I'm sorry if it was too confusing being just verbal, but I'm happy to take any questions you all have.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Appreciate the update. So I'll look to council and board members, and I'll handle all hands here for questions. So. Okay, first up, Chris Batsavage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Catherine, for the update and going through the questions. I don't have a question, just a little clarification. You're talking about states with supplemental sampling in the Mid-Atlantic. Just want to add, though, North Carolina is kind of, I guess, considered more in the South Atlantic. We also have supplemental APIS sampling, and we've had that for quite some time. I don't know what percentage over our base sampling that is, but just for just added context from this conversation. Thanks.
Yes, thank you for that. I should have acknowledged North Carolina as well. They actually sample, more than all the other states. So yeah, thank you for making sure that we have that clarification.
Agreed. Thanks, Chris. Jason, did you have a question or follow-up?
Just to follow up on in terms of trends of samples for either the FES or APIS on the federal side, since it's still kind of the dominant source there, has that, with our port sampling programs in the Northeast, we've seen a pretty substantial erosion, a little bit because of lower funding, I think maybe mostly because of higher per unit costs. So on just the federal side, do you know if the sampling intensity for FES and APIS have been kind of stable or going down or increasing or what?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So what I have is the allocation, and the sample allocation has remained pretty constant for the federal baseline. That doesn't necessarily translate to completed assignments. That can vary, year to year based on response rates and other things, or cancellations of assignments and things like that. But I can follow up and see if we have information on that I could share with you offline, and then you can share it with the council.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Not seeing any other hands yet, so maybe giving them some time. Catherine, I had a question and that turned into two, because if I heard you correctly, you were saying calibration. So my original question was going to be, is there any chance that the new estimates, which I was going to say recalibrated estimates, if there's a possibility of it kind of as a staggered rollout, or is it something that will happen all at once, just thinking of the species that may need it sooner than others? And then I guess that question of maybe a technicality, is this not considered a recalibration? Is it because of new methodology and it's considered a calibration?
Yeah, so the first part of your question about whether it'll be a staggered rollout. So the calibration applies to effort, and effort isn't species specific. So we unfortunately, I was asked this at the New England Council meeting the other week as well. And unfortunately, because this particular calibration isn't species specific, we can't prioritize specific species. So it is all going to be done at once. And that's that summer timeline. And then your second question of whether it was a calibration or a recalibration. Yeah, I mean, I guess you could call it either. I guess we've just been calling it a calibration, because it's a new model that builds on the previous model that was used for the last calibration that we did. So it builds on that one, but makes a lot of improvements based on the reviews of the prior model. So yeah, let me know if if that answers your question or not.
Yes, it does, absolutely. I appreciate that. And I think knowing that we have the ASMFC board here, from my understanding from the stock assessment work group, they are hopeful for striped bass, that they can make that timeline work for the assessment there. And I know we're all certainly hopeful of that. So I am still not seeing any other hands, surprisingly. So if that's true, maybe and this is obviously important and affects a lot of folks. So maybe I could give a chance for a few comments from the public, or questions, should I say. Okay, not seeing any hands. Again, very much appreciate the update. And unless you have anything else or staff has anything regarding this particular part of the update, we can move on.
No, yeah, thank you again for having me. And if anyone has other follow-up questions, feel free to email me. It's catherine.papakostas@noaa.gov.
Thank you again. Okay, so with that, we will move on to the recreational sector separation, get an update here on the workshop and general timelines. And I'm kicking it off, sorry, I believe Kylie's going to start us off.
Yes, that's correct. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, it sounds good, Kylie. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right, I'll go ahead with a presentation on the recreational sector separation amendment, specifically an update on our tentative workshop plans and updates to the action timeline. So just as a quick reminder, this action considers managing the for-hire and private recreational components of the fisheries for summer flounder, scut, black sea bass, and bluefish differently, and also considers for-hire permitting requirements at the state and federal levels. So a quick recap of the 4 different alternative sets that we have in that document that were last considered by the Council and Policy Board back in December. There's first a category of alternatives for mode management guidelines, which would consist of things like guidelines and best practices for applying mode management in our rec measure setting process. There's also a set of alternatives for a for-hire letter of authorization, or LOA program, and also alternatives for federal for-hire permitting requirements and state for-hire permitting and reporting requirements. So I won't go through all the details recapping all of the draft alternatives that were considered previously, but that previous discussion document is linked in the cover memo for this tab if you'd like to take a look at more of the details of the draft alternatives that were last considered. But back in December, the Council and Policy Board reviewed draft alternatives that were developed by the FMAP PDT, and particularly given the impacts of the government shutdown and other issues, we had a number of questions and areas of further guidance that we were requesting from the Council and Policy Board regarding the configuration of all these draft alternatives. We had a number of areas where we had identified the need to get additional feedback or kind of refine our sub options and refine the way that the alternatives were drafted. So the Council and Policy Board had an extensive discussion about that back in December, and we did get through some of those questions. As you'll recall, there was a long list. We got through some discussion and some issues were addressed. For example, removing some alternatives like the option to require states to consider or implement mode management. but we didn't get through all the questions. It got to be a pretty complex conversation, and there was the recognition during that discussion of the need to get some additional stakeholder input on these draft options. And the Council and Policy Board, I decided to hold a workshop in 2026 in order to further refine the draft alternatives. So there was recognition at the time that this was sort of putting the development of a public hearing document on pause. And so this will extend the action timeline. So we're here today just to kind of go through, I'll go through in the next slides, some of our kind of tentative plans for this workshop and how it impacts the rest of the timeline. So potentially the biggest question is workshop timing. So when we were thinking about the workshop initially, we considered a couple different options. We were initially thinking spring 2026, and specifically kind of looking at the May, early June timeframe, but we pretty quickly realized, with the help of some of our discussions with some Council and Policy Board members, that we were going to have a really hard time getting the right people in the room for these discussions at the workshop with a May or June workshop, just given that that's, the start of the rec season. That's kind of peak season for most of the participants. And we pretty quickly realized that was not ideal. And in order to get sort of the right people in the room, we were weighing the pros and cons between a workshop on the earlier side, such as in April, or pushing the workshop back to September. So we weighed some pros and cons. Council staff recommend holding the workshop in September, just given the balance of kind of the issues here that I'll walk through. So we were thinking that a September workshop allows a little bit more time for planning the workshop, so we could develop some more tailored workshop materials and an agenda and a more kind of thoughtful, structured plan for the workshop. It would give us some additional time to get a facilitator, get the facilitator on board with planning. And also we can spend more time identifying participants, and participants would have longer notice time of participating in this. Then we could spend some of the months prior to the workshop continuing to work on some of the amendment tasks, such as kind of working to refine the draft alternatives, the existing range, answering some of the questions that we had about feasibility and things like that, and then potentially front load some of the document development for later stages of the process. Of course, the downside to a September workshop is that it pushes off the timeline. It's going to lengthen the amendment timeline a little bit more than it was already going to be lengthened by holding a workshop in the first place. And then, you possibly kind of lose some stakeholder interest in the process. So on the flip side, we could do an earlier workshop in April, which would kind of keep momentum going on the action and have less of a delay, and have folks have the opportunity to share ideas earlier in the process. But we would need to move really quickly on getting a facilitator, and they would likely be less involved in the planning. We'd need to get participants quickly, and we all know our spring calendars are filling up pretty fast, so we may have limited availability of participants for an April workshop. And then we will have less time to kind of prepare for the workshop, and we think that we would likely have to limit the scope of workshop discussions a little bit more, and we'd need to think about what exactly that would mean and how to do that. We would kind of go into that earlier workshop with materials based primarily on what we presented to the Council and the Policy Board back in December of 2025. So a little bit of refinement, but we wouldn't have a lot of time to kind of tailor the materials to the workshop, if that makes sense. So that's kind of the summary of where we were going back and forth on these different timelines, and Council staff sort of landed on preferring a September workshop. So something we're looking for some feedback on today. As far as location, duration, and format, we're looking at a location likely in the Mid-Atlantic region near an airport to accommodate a range of stakeholders along the coast. So this action impacts both the fluke scup sea bass and the bluefish FMPs, and with the bluefish FMP particularly being the whole range of the coast, we do expect we would have participants from the Mid-Atlantic region, the South Atlantic, and New England regions. So just to make it easier for folks, having something near an airport would be good. We would look at 1 to 1.5 days in person, with the participants primarily focused on in-person participants. We recognize some people may want to listen to portions of it, and that might be possible depending on what we want to do with the workshop, but in-person participation would be preferred. So the workshop objectives, this is one area too where we're seeking some feedback today just to make sure everyone is on the same page and we're on the right track with the workshop objectives. The primary focus would be reviewing and helping to refine the draft alternatives that were identified for further consideration in December 2025 by the Council and Policy Board. So essentially the range that we had presented with obviously any action items that were removed from consideration, not taken forward for further discussion, but looking at those draft alternatives and then discussing and providing feedback on some of those questions that were highlighted by the FMAP PDT regarding the configuration of those alternatives. So the workshop participants would be kind of helping respond to some of those questions and kind of help guide the FMAP PDT and the Council and Board as to how the draft alternatives should be configured or modified or refined. There's also the third objective here is to recommend any additional options within the existing scope of the current range of alternatives that the Council and Policy Board should consider and provide supporting detail for that if possible. So just wanted to know on this last draft objective, this is based on our current understanding of what the Council and Policy Board wanted at the workshop. So our understanding was that the intent was to allow for some new ideas to be discussed, but new ideas that are within the existing scope of the action or within the current, broad range of alternatives. So ideas that would kind of fall within those 4 categories of alternatives that I covered earlier. So we would be thinking about things like new variations on existing alternatives or new sub-options where we kind of need more specifics about how to approach something. So for example, we have this alternative 1B about uniform mode management guidelines or best practices. So a new idea for, exactly what do we mean by mode management guidelines, that kind of thing would be what we were looking for in terms of new ideas. So we are not expecting that we would be able to kind of take things in an entirely new direction or introduce completely different approaches without kind of muddling the timeline and complicating the amendment and having the scope of the action sort of balloon to the point where it would complicate amendment development. So that's our understanding, and what we intend with that is sort of refining options within the existing scope. So in terms of kind of what specific discussions might be had, just wanted to recap what was discussed back in December in terms of the list of discussion questions provided by the FMAP PDT to kind of seek guidance on each of these 4 categories. So we wouldn't necessarily be limited to this, but this is just the types of things we might discuss, and this is paraphrased from that list of discussion questions from December. So for recreational mode management guidelines, we would be looking for feedback on kind of the specific types of guidelines to be considered. You might recall that we did not have much guidance on this, and the FMAP PDT was kind of stuck on developing this without some input on what type of guidelines to consider, particularly when considering the flexibility in our current process. So we want some input on the trade-offs between the flexibility that we have in our current process versus kind of moving toward more consistent and increased use of mode management. Also looking for some input. We have an option on regional for-hire measures, so looking for input on configuration of that. Regarding the LOA program alternatives, we have a number of questions regarding configuration, including which species should it apply to, how long should folks participate, what are the eligibility requirements that should be associated with that, what are the benefits that someone would get from joining the LOA program, what are the associated reporting requirements, and what are the regional configurations for the regional LOA measures option. For federal for-hire permit requirements, we're looking for some feedback on appropriate eligibility criteria for the options pertaining to moratorium or limited entry options. Potential configuration details for a tiered permit system, and then what should options look like for new entrants under limited entry options, and then are there any additional permit requirements that should be considered. And then the state for-hire permitting and reporting, for both of those, we need kind of details of how that would work for a potential requirement for states to adopt for-hire limited entry programs and for states to adopt minimum for-hire reporting requirements. So what are the sort of minimum requirements that would be put in place, and what would the timeline be for implementing those? So just an idea of like the type of input that we would be looking for at the workshop. So for participants, we recommend keeping the group relatively small, around 20 participants, with folks that are highly engaged in or knowledgeable about for hire and or private rec fishing. We think it's important to, capture all of the different recreational fishing modes, as well as representation along the entire coast to capture the range of both of the FMPs. Participants could include council and board members, AP members, and others, and looking for some feedback there if folks have a particular idea about, what kind of representation should occur at the workshop. And then given limited participation and just to ensure kind of a balanced representation, we did suggest a process where we would have some kind of application available and workshop participants would apply to attend and be reviewed by the FMAP PDT, which would recommend a balanced kind of group, and that would be reviewed and approved by the council and policy board chairs. So we expect the workshop to be facilitated, and so we would seek a contractor to help us prepare for and facilitate the workshop, and release an RFP for that as soon as we are able to do so, and we have more details about when the workshop would occur and what we expect to accomplish. So now moving to the timeline implications, just to recap where we thought we might be during the previous discussion back in November. This was the timeline that we went into that meeting with, where we were expecting that the council and board would consider approving a public hearing document and a draft amendment document this spring, followed by public hearings in the spring and summer, and then final action potentially in August 2026, with rulemaking and the effective date being sometime in 2027. So that was our previous understanding of the timeline before the decision was made to hold a workshop. And then now, with consideration of a September workshop, we know that that will have to change a little bit. So just to think about a little bit about what we would do if we held a September workshop between now and then. Staff expect that we would spend some time. Of course, we would spend a lot of energy on the workshop planning itself. So identifying a facilitator and participants and all the logistics, developing the materials and agenda. And then we could do some FMAP PDT work to continue developing the existing options and sort of get those in as best of shape as we can for the workshop. So we need to do some things like refining the structure of the alternatives. We can think about input that we did receive back in December, have some additional conversations with GARFO and the states about feasibility, and then tweaking some sub-options based on new information. So for example, there's, if you recall the discussion in December about the permit qualification criteria options, we did those based on not having the data to see what those would result in. So now that we have that data, we can sort of go back and tweak those a little bit. So that's what we would kind of expect to focus FMAP PDT time on, is the existing options. And then as far as any additional ideas that folks want to raise at the workshop, we could make sure that those get incorporated into the workshop material discussions if appropriate and within the scope. But I will note that we don't expect to have a lot of FMAP PDT capacity to do much more than sort of packaging those for the workshop. So we don't expect to have a lot of capacity to do more in-depth development and analysis of things that are not within the current draft. So ultimately the final action and implementation timeline kind of depends on the workshop outcomes and how complex things get and the scope of the action. But we think it would push final action back about a year to August 2027. And we did want to note that we think that it is possible that we could have a faster timeline if the scope of the action is reduced or if the alternatives get simplified in some form. So our best guess at sort of the revised amendment timeline, assuming a September workshop, is that we would do all of that workshop preparation. And as I mentioned, spring and summer could work a little bit on further refining the existing alternatives and the questions for the workshop. Hold that workshop in September, produce a report from that in the fall, and then we could start to refine the draft alternatives, bring that back to the council and policy board in December to approve a range of alternatives, for inclusion in a public hearing document. And following that stage, we would then develop the draft public hearing document and draft amendment document that could be considered for approval in the spring of 2027, followed by public hearings and a comment period in spring and summer of 2027, and final action potentially in August 2027, meaning that the effective date of changes would be sometime likely in early 2028. So that's about all I have, and just wanted to kind of recap. We're just looking for feedback, if you have any, on our tentative workshop plans, the timing, the location, the participants, both in terms of number and the range of participants, and particularly feedback on our objectives to make sure that folks understand what we're trying to do with the workshop. And then if you have any feedback on the revised amendment timeline and action plan or the action scope, we would like to hear that as well. So that's all I have. Happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you, Kylie, for the presentation. And I think, once we get on the other side of this, there's going to be a very long thank you list to all the council and commission staff that have been working on this, the FMAP PDT, and I know, members of industry, including council and board members, have been working since December to help keep moving this along. So I appreciate all the work that's gone into this. So we'll start with questions, please, on the presentation from council members and board members, and then we can move into discussion after that. I see Jim Gilmore. Go ahead, Jim.
Thanks, Joe. Kylie, a great presentation, and I'm, completely supportive of that delay, because if we're going to do this, we got to do it right. One of the things in terms of the membership for the workshop with the 20, recognizing the fact that I'm looking at completely in support of the concept, but think back to when we have state by state management, and then the complications we've had with that enforcement on some of the more complex border water states. Enforcement is going to be a big issue, because now if we get into essentially doing this, we'd even be splitting it more. So we'd have 2 different sets of rules for the recreational fishing, and then individual states may have, if you have 3 border states, you have 6 different set of rules possibly going at the same time. So is there an opportunity to include enforcement in the workshop? Because some of the ideas that may come up really may stretch the ability of enforcement to deal with this. So if that's possible, I think it would be a good suggestion, is that we at least have some representation from one of those more complicated border states, which has got multiple borders, to maybe help drive this forward. Thanks.
So I can't figure out, not easy to figure out how to raise my hand here, but yeah, I think we can certainly keep that in mind and look into inclusion of enforcement folks. That would be helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. And yeah, please just don't worry about raising your hand. Jump in as questions come through. I think that's a great point, Jim. And as long as our head of marine law enforcement, Brian Scott, is not on here, then I'll certainly volunteer him to be part of that work group. Okay. Surprisingly, I'm not seeing.
Joe, sorry.
Oh no.
Sorry about that.
Well, if you are here, then maybe you would be happy to volunteer yourself.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Be happy to help any way I can. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, I have a couple hands. I saw Bob Beal's hand go up first. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Just a point about resources, and I'm not trying to steer the timeline for the workshop, but if we'll go the other way. ASMSC has resources to fully support this workshop, but it would have to be conducted before the end of June. So if it is pushed back to September, the pot of money that we were thinking we could use to support the workshop won't be available then. But if that's a better timeline and we can find an alternate source of funding, then September it will work. I just wanted to get that out there, that we had volunteered to pay for this, but we do have a time constraint on the funding that we were going to use.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate that note. Hand from council, Anna Beckwith, go ahead.
Hey, thanks. Yeah, I was originally going to say that I was absolutely fine with the new schedule for September, and then Bob started talking about funding. So I will be satisfied with any direction that we take. I think the workshop will be great, and hopefully that will assist us with getting some insight in a proper direction on how we can move this forward in a useful fashion. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And I don't necessarily want to put Chris Moore on the spot. We haven't had a conversation about this, but there you go, Chris. But I don't expect staff came to us without some discussion on it. But go ahead, Chris. I appreciate you putting your hand up.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Kylie and Hannah and I have had this conversation, and certainly in terms of waiting until September does mean that we won't be able to use that ASMFC money to support the workshop or the facilitator. So that did give me some pause, but since then we've had some positive information about our 2026 budget. We did get about 25% of our money about two weeks ago. We've been promised that we're going to get the rest of our money in March. So I am confident that that's going to happen. And with that, we should be able to support the workshop in September.
Thank you, Chris. It helps to know that either timeline is still on the table. And I do know, as I mentioned, we have some council and board members that have been working on this. I do see one hand from the public, but I'd like to stay with council and board for right now. So if we're ready, we could move on from questions into discussions. And I see Adam Nowalski's hand is up. Go ahead, Adam.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'll start with a question and then maybe it'll lead to something substantive. During the last meeting, I had brought up and appeared to have some support around the table of under the option for the regional for-hire measures, looking at possibly an option to set recreational for-hire measures in conjunction with the current non-for-hire measures, basically looking at a concept that's been talked about a number of times before, essentially a reset of measures to a degree, how those might impact the overall expected harvest, and then work towards using the workshop to further flesh that idea out. As I understand this current slide that's up on the screen right now, in order to have staff prepare that in advance of the workshop and have it on the workshop schedule, that would require some positive action by the board and council today in the form of a motion. Would that be correct?
Yeah, so Adam, I think staff have had some conversations about the proposal, and I think there's still a little bit of some lack of clarity about the extent to which it falls within the current range or not. But I think there's some, I guess, sense that some aspects of it may be a bit outside of the current range, particularly looking at the kind of reset of measures and some other aspects of the proposed process. So I think council and commission staff have generally discussed that a motion to bring that forward to the workshop would be requested if that is something you want the FMAP PDT to look at.
Okay, so to that end, when chair's ready, we'll get through questions, or if you want to have any other discussion or use a motion to facilitate that, I do have something ready that staff had helped me prepare to bring forward. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Adam. I see Chris Moore's hand, so I'll go to Chris, and then if I'm happy to throw in some ideas there too. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and certainly want to hear your ideas as well. I'm not exactly sure how much work we're talking about, Adam, but certainly, I've had the conversation with Kylie and Hannah about your proposal, and I'm not sure that we need a motion, depending upon how you might answer this next question, which is, what exactly are we talking about as it relates to additional work for one particular alternative? If what you're coming up with is added to the suite of alternatives that we've already looked at, and that alternative that you come up with is treated in the same way as the other alternatives, then I don't think we need to do anything relative to a motion or have any additional consideration for how we're going to handle those alternatives in the workshop. If you're proposing that we take what you were saying as an alternative that's going to be treated differently than the suite of alternatives that we already have, specifically if we're going to have the FMAP PDT folks spend a lot of time detailing the specifics associated with the alternative, then yes, we need to know that. And yes, the council and the board have to make that decision, because we've already agreed from a council perspective, we've already agreed to a 2026 implementation plan. And there's only so many resources available to address the actions that we've identified for that, for 2026. So if there's anything outside the scope of that, then we need to start talking about what kind of things aren't going to happen as a result of this staff, council staff, focusing on a particular alternative that you're coming up with. So, so that's the question for you. What are you thinking about as it relates to your particular alternative?
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it very much. This is certainly one of the, thought it was a great idea doing this February meeting virtually, but here's certainly one of the challenges here where this would certainly be the type of conversations we'd be having around lunch, etc. I'll do my best to be as concise as I can with this in the interest of time, and most of all, clarity for board, council, and staff members here today. So at the last meeting, it's not a new idea, but as part of the sector separation, there's been discussed the idea of a different set of for-hire measures. The LOA, for example, certainly contemplates that. At the last meeting, we had some conversation, again, at a preliminary basis. I've had some follow-up conversation with staff. I've continued to work with Garfo, some other council members, discussed this with some board members as well. The idea of trying to say, if we had a set of alternative regional for-hire measures that differed from what we're currently implementing under conservation equivalency, what might catch and harvest look like under those sets of measures? We would likely at some point, I'm not sure what that point would be, need some help from the Science Center in allocating some RDM time. I'll say that at the board level, I've had conversation with a number of TC members as we've gone through working to set alternative black sea bass measures for 2026, where they've expressed a lot of optimism about the capabilities of the RDM and hope further development will continue to improve that product and make it even better, but they've been very impressed with it. So specifically what I'm talking about at this time is working to come up with a possible range of separate for-hire measures, trying to determine what the associated harvest or range of harvest presently and ultimately catch as we move forward would look like under those measures. And then bring that idea forward at the workshop to determine how that would work from a functional basis. Specifically, would those measures change the same way that the rest of the non-for-hire measures change through the percent change approach? Should there be some cap on how much for-hire measures are allowed to liberalize or reduce to provide additional stability within the fishery, which has been a feature, a goal of recreational reform since day one. So what I'd be looking for in advance of the workshop is some work to be done to allow for consideration of what that range of alternative measures might be that we bring forward for discussion at the workshop. Let me pause there and see if that helps move this conversation forward.
Chris, yeah, go ahead, Chris, sorry.
Yeah, so Adam, that does help, and it actually makes me nervous, and I'll tell you why. Because the way that you presented it suggests that someone is going to have to do a lot of work to basically refine one of the alternatives that's currently in the package for consideration by workshop participants in September. So the way that I'm thinking about it, you're preempting the workshop. You're preempting the conversations that you're going to have at the workshop relative to the other alternatives, because you're going to be presenting an alternative that you basically think could work better than the others. Just thinking about it. And I'm not sure that that's what we want to do. And it may be that you need to rethink the workshop, right? In terms of, what are we trying to do with the workshop? If in fact you're talking about refining a very specific alternative that you think could work very well, that may be the alternative that does work. In which case we forget about a workshop. We task the FMAT and the PDT for some very specific alternatives and say, put these together in a package, in a public hearing document that we can get out to the public sooner rather than later. And then that becomes the public format for input as to what we're going to do with the final decision.
Yeah, I'll just jump in, and then Adam, I'll if you had a follow-up. One of the reasons why I had my hand up was, or said that I had some thoughts on this, was on the presentation that we just got prior to this, on when the new MRIP estimates will be available. I imagine that's going to be, highly impactful to the RDM, and I don't know how that timeline works with a fall workshop, if there's an expectation that there would be model runs just prior to that. I think that might be a bridge too far. And so either I agree with Chris, we're either talking about changing our expectations perhaps for the workshop itself, or something as an alternative to the workshop. So to be fair, Adam, I'll ask if you had any follow-up to our responses, and then I see Chelsea has her hand up, so we'll go to Chelsea from commission staff after that.
I appreciate that very much. I view this very much as a collaborative process. When we leave here today, our path forward is not going to be mine or any subset of council and board members. It's ultimately going to be the property of the board and the council. And that decision is going to come and be informed by input from staff. So I'm extremely grateful and appreciative of that. So I appreciate any help in the direction that we can move forward. I think my overarching sentiment, is that there was some discussion around the table for this idea of considering alternative measures for the for-hire sector derived in a manner other than through the LOA approach. And my goal here today is only to keep that ball up in the air and not have it be sidelined to the point that nobody else thinks about it. We get to the workshop, it wasn't on the plan. The workshop results are what they are. In fairness to council and ASMFC action and implementation plans, we turn around and say, well, this is all we've got. And at the end of the day, we ultimately have a product that doesn't achieve the stated goals of this action. So that's all I'm trying to achieve here, and appreciate the collaborative approach from leadership, from staff, and all the board and council members today. Hopefully we can continue to work towards that goal before we leave. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Adam. And as I mentioned, I saw Chelsea's hand go up during this discussion. So Chelsea, did you have a point you wanted to add?
Yes, I did want to add, I guess, and apologies if I cut out. I'm having some network issues today, but depending on what happens with this idea, I did just want to caution, coming up with measures would likely require the use of the RDM, and I don't want to promise having measures even by a September workshop because it may not be possible given the capacity of the RDM team. And I think some members from the Science Center are online that may be able to comment to it better than I can. But I did just, want to throw that out there as we're talking about an idea that potentially, asks to come to this workshop with measures developed for this separate program here.
Okay, thank you. And so John here, I see your hand is up. Go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just want to agree with, I think it was Chelsea, we can't, the RDM team is down. We've been working very hard to support the councils. We'd have to look at an additional request and see if we can support or not. So, yes, once the council determines the direction it wants to go, Science Center can look at that and determine how much support we can provide.
Okay, thank you. And I think an important part of the discussion isn't that this would never be part of what comes out of a workshop necessarily, but I think we're all trying to temper expectations of what may be available ahead of or going into this workshop. So thank you, John. I see Anna's hand is up, and I'm not sure if that's an older hand there.
No, that's old. Thanks. I'll put it down.
Okay, no worries. I'm not seeing any other hands. Just a reminder, we are on discussions, or we could be ready for motions. I see Adam's hand is up, and if that's true, Bob, I may turn it over to you to look if there is a board motion. That way you can see if you have a second.
Yeah, that's great. Do you want to call on Adam now and then see where he goes, Joe, and then we'll see if we need a second?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead, Adam.
Okay, great. So again, let's get something up on the board here. And I think what I'm looking for is not that what I've said is be all end all here, assuming I get a second and a like motion from the council. It would be very helpful to have clear discussion about what the expectations are, perhaps an expectation of alternative measures actually being drafted in advance of the workshop may or may not be possible, but maybe this at least keeps the idea up in the air to allow FMAP PD team members to give some thought to it, what the guardrails might be on it that I had mentioned, and then further discuss the merits of it at the workshop. So we'll go ahead and put this up. Move to direct the FMAT PDT to develop a for-hire baseline measures option for discussion at the workshop. This alternative would create a process to set regional measures for the for-hire mode that are tailored to the needs of the for-hire mode and that improve viability for operators. Private shore measures would be developed after evaluating expected for-hire catch to ensure the recreational harvest target is not exceeded.
Great, thank you, Adam. Is there a second to Adam's motion for the policy board? I don't see any hands. I don't know if I'm missing them or not, but I don't see. Matt Gates, just saw your hand. Oh, go ahead. Is that a second, Matt?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, I'd like to hear the discussion on this, so I'll second it. Thanks.
Great. Adam, do you want to provide any more justification for your motion?
Would you want to wait to see if there's a like motion from the council first?
Yeah, that's probably a very good point. I'll turn that back to Joe.
Got it. Okay. So I'll look to the council. Is there anyone? I see Greg Hewitt. Greg, you're making the motion for the council?
Yes, Joe, I am making a motion for it. Thanks.
Okay. And Maureen, is that a second?
Yes, I'm seconding it. I'd like to hear the
Okay.
discussion.
Right. Thank you.
So with that, I think we'll go back to Adam, if everyone's okay with that, and hear his justification, if he has anything else to add.
I appreciate that. I think at this point, let's hear the discussion. Let's turn this over to the board and council, get some more thoughts about it. Grateful for the opportunity to have brought this forward here. Again, I think it builds on the conversation that was had at the last meeting, and most of all keeps this concept up in the air so it doesn't get lost going into the workshop. Thank you.
Oh, well, sorry, Bob, didn't mean to jump in, but staying on since I'm here. Matt, do you have anything to add to the rationale for the motion itself?
Yeah, just we've gotten a lot of feedback recently from our for-hire industry saying that they need rules separate from the regular rec fishery to keep their businesses moving. And I just thought this might be a decent way to do that. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Matt. And then we'll go to Greg Hewitt. Greg, anything additional to add before we get into discussions?
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I think it's going to provide the alternative. It's going to provide us with some options, that actually I don't think we thought through the whole time. That's going to provide different ideas for the workshop and for the group here, the commission and the board. I think some time's gone into this, and I put a little time into it with Adam and with the board member and with the council. And I think this can provide alternatives and some other ideas for the group and everyone down the road. And I think by doing this, I think it also will provide some good ideas for the for-hire fleet, potentially, to go with down the road also. So I am very much in favor of this. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Greg. I'll go to Maureen.
Thank you, Joe. But Adam, Matt, and Greg have really said, I pretty much agree with what they said. And I also like to hear further discussion.
Understood. And Bob, if you're okay with that, I'll continue to call through hands-on discussion from council, and then I think we'll take it out to the public, and then from there I'll have you call the vote on behalf of the board. But as far as this, very good, thank you, Bob. So as far as continued discussion, I see Doug Heyman's hand is up. Go ahead, Doug.
Well, thank you, Joe. And the question for the maker of the motion, and I think you all know that I'm adamantly opposed to amendment as a matter of principle. But just to show that within the motion itself, the second line of the motion reading, private shore measures will be developed after evaluating expected for-hire catch. And I mean, to me, right off the bat, that's an incendiary bomb just within the motion. And so I'd like to hear Adam explain to me what that means, that private shore measures come after for-hire catch. Adam, could you explain that a little bit for me, please? And thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Yeah, it depends on how you look at it. The goal here is to, at some point in time, again, hearing John Hare's comments, Chelsea's comments, we understand the RDM is a question mark. Long term, the goal would be to, well, let me start short term first. Short term would be to work on coming up with some sets of regional for-hire measures that meet the needs of the for-hire fishing community, i.e. the mode. It's not just about the operators, but a lot of the for-hire fisher people have needs that are different from an access perspective, how often they fish, it's their rationale for fishing, etc., as well as just the viability of keeping those for-hire operations open. Depending on what those measures might look like, the non-for-hire level of harvest may be more or less than what it presently is. I can't answer that question until we have the opportunity to do some additional analysis. Certainly open to any wordsmithing here. This last sentence, though, is really more about, and I hope that we can focus on the importance of ensuring the recreational harvest target not being exceeded. Which comes first, the chicken or the egg? We can debate that offline. But that was really the more important part of this, that the combined set of the measures, the process would be, let's evaluate some alternative for-hire measures, determine what, if any, and what direction, positive or negative, the impact would be on the non-for-hire modes, and ensure that we weren't exceeding the target. That was really the goal here. I'll also add, while I have the opportunity in responding to the concerns of the South, is that I think part of the discussion here would also be what species this would apply to. I've been made abundantly clear that bluefish is a species that is the important driver. It's the reason why we're doing this at the policy board level and not the summer flounder, black sea bass, and scup board. But yet it's black sea bass that has been the species that is probably the biggest angst, and that recreational reform has really been crafted around. So my plea to the South, and at least one state in the North that are primarily interested in bluefish here, would be to allow us to continue to work on this, with the understanding that it doesn't at this time require this action, a separate set of measures for bluefish, and that once we determine the viability of this, then we can cross the bridge of whether or not we'd want to include bluefish in this change as well.
Okay, thank you, Adam. Let's see, I see Greg Hewitt's hand is up. I don't know, Greg, if that's an old hand or perhaps a comment.
No, it's old. It's old, Joe.
Okay.
Sorry.
Very good. Nope, no problem. So Jim Gilmore.
Thanks, Joe. And Adam, well, thanks for the clarification on the species, because that was the first question I had, how we're going to separate that out. But I'm still struggling with that first statement when it says develop a for-hired baseline measures option. And I just not exactly sure what that says. Can you, is there a way you could give a hypothetical example of what that would look like? That might help me understand it better, Adam. Thanks.
Yeah, so thank goodness for having these unlimited plans on these phones here, or for my talking here, I'd have the big bill. Thanks for everybody wanting to hear me. So, Jim, are you concerned here about the part about directing the FMAT PDT and the amount of time that that would require on their end? Or are you looking for discussion about what the option itself would entail? Or are you looking for comments on both?
It was the latter, just what, the specifics of what it would entail.
Yeah, so what I would envision is I've already had the pleasure of working with a number of other council and board members who have expressed a willingness to work with other members of industry to have discussions on a coast-wide basis about what the for-hire community really needs. Again, both the people that patronize the for-hire fleet as well as the operators themselves. We hear that we have problems, but we don't have a lot of information about what exactly we need to do to fix it. On some of the expectations for consideration here should be, the element of the 2-year change that we currently have with the measure setting process. Is that still appropriate? Should we look at when for-hire measures change, let's say as a hypothetical right now, that the for-hire measures have a little bit larger piece of the recreational harvest target? Well, should the trade-off of that be then that moving forward, if for-hire operators are getting measures that they say work for them now, should we then cap those measures in opportunities for liberalizations in the future and apply liberalizations to the non-for-hire sector, not the for-hire sector? Should we take a harder look at the VTR or other data that's submitted by the for-hire operators to understand the contribution to the harvest in a given year and make a determination if moving forward those for-hire measures should be changed if their harvest is not changing and RHL isn't changing, and it's really the non-for-hire harvest that's driving the need to change measures. So those would be some of the elements of this option moving forward. Those would be two separate pieces that I think I'd like to hopefully have happen. The former part where there's some input about what the measures would need to look like, I think would need to come largely outside of staff. Again, there's been some board and council members that have expressed a willingness to work to bring that information forward. And then the development side would be some of these other procedural topics that I talked about that I think at a minimum, if staff just and some of these are not new, if staff was able to go back, look at where these topics have been talked about in the past, compile them for conversation at the workshop, without actually drafting them into sub options within the document. If we just had some conversation document at the workshop about them, I think that would accomplish the development as I envision it. Hope that helps.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, now we're getting some hands. So I have Nicola Mazur next. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have some similar concerns about the sentence of the motion that Doug Hayman's brought up, and you know, I'm worried that this is kind of getting ahead of the conversation that I would anticipate happening at the workshop, and one of those fundamental questions of whether or not we are trying to design or hire fishery that are conservationally equivalent to the other modes, or whether they are just better. So again, I feel like this is preempting some of that discussion, as Chris Moore pointed out. I agree with him about that, and just the myriad of sub options that I see as part of this, as we're just kind of discussed. You know, it feels like it would need additional crafting with staff's help prior to that. So I would prefer that we stick to the suite of, you know, the range of what we anticipate going to the workshop. It does have regional for hire measures on there, but getting into any particular specific at this point could bias the discussion and lead us away from talking about some of those underlying, you know, fundamental questions about mode management. Thanks.
Thank you, Nicola. John Maniscalco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, well, it's not that I support this without any reservation, but I do see something that, provides fire industry with equal footing, across multiple states, perhaps with a greater level of stability, especially when measures are getting particularly tight, might really benefit these small businesses. Certainly the development of something of this kind of option, it needs to be done in a fully transparent way. Adam had talked about maybe some of the trade-offs with, initially better options and stability being more limited liberalizations at some point in the future. And of course, I'm kind of interested to see how that would potentially play out if we ever got to a place where, private angler regulations might, actually be more liberal than the for hire. I think we would have to consider that eventuality. And, again, it's not without reservations. I'd love to see some measures developed. I think that would be helpful. But I don't know how helpful they would be if it's not with the latest MRIP, time series. And so I think the availability of that information is going to be a problem for this motion. But nonetheless, I appreciate the concept and would like to see it, better explored. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Ben Dark, go ahead, Ben.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, two things. Quick, first, just like to echo Doug and Nicola's concerns and others. Obviously, in these situations, sometimes better defined measures help aid the discussion and focus that discussion, but fear that of those measures, when trying to determine those prior to some of these workshops, that the cart before the horse might be is the potential there, just with being unsure of where those might go. But my main reason for raising my hand too was to see if these is the thought for these to be hybrid, a potential for these to be attended virtually. I say that because if the request previously to say that after the fact, once we determine some of these measures and hear from the work group to determine then after that point if bluefish would or would not be included, it might prove difficult to try to get people there from the southern states. I don't want to speak for all the southern states, but speaking for South Carolina, it might prove difficult to get somebody to travel to them to say, hey, this may or may not be included at all. But maybe have a better option if it is virtual. So just wanted to ask. Thanks.
Joe, I
Yeah,
think you
well-
have your hand up as a board member, so I'll go ahead and call on you if that's correct.
Yeah, well, actually, let me just try and help address Ben's question, comment, and I think, that's part of what staff is looking for is feedback on who will be participating in this. And so I think, Ben, until that discussion happens, it would probably be premature for either a chair or council or commission staff to try and guess that. I think it is important to get feedback on what we think the participant list would look like, and then I think that would help form an answer for you. And then this always gets awkward because Bob's recognized me as a board member. So switching hats here and very quickly doing so. I agree. I think I'm in the same place as John Maniscalco, and so not all the board members, and certainly not all the council members, may have listened in to the board meeting for discussions on developing conservation equivalency measures for black sea bass. But one of the things that happened there is we were trying to divvy up the pot to get to what the best recreational measures would be by region. New Jersey happened to be in its own region. All the states north of us on the board and participating in the plan are in a region together. One of the tough decisions for me as a New Jersey representative that I did support was that that discussion would happen for the larger region first, and then we would develop options for, well, not necessarily develop options for New Jersey, but New Jersey would know, their portion of the pie at that time. I think there's something similar here regarding the private shore versus the for-hire industry, especially since this is a motion to look at this regionally. I think, that is an important part of this for me, that the various needs of the private shore measures may be very different from region to region, maybe more varying than what we'll see coming out of the for-hire regions. And so I think that alone makes that portion of that very similar to me, although I do realize that later sentence is concerning to some, but that's where I see, value in that. And so, as a board member, I could support that. Thank you. Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure where you're going to go next, but before you take a vote, I just wanted to focus on one word, which is develop. So we've heard a couple different definitions, I think, of that word develop. So one included, very specific runs that would indicate very specific, potentially bag size seasonal limits for, party charter folks in different regions. The other definition would be just a general overview of what this alternative might mean and a package of other alternatives that would be included in the package. So I think we're moving towards that latter definition, but I just want to make sure we're all on the same page before we vote on this. Before you vote on this, I don't vote on this. Before you guys vote on this.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. And I think one of the other probably important discussions is, whether or not the RDM can kind of handle some of that. I'm thinking to the angler preference, and are like, it would be very helpful to know, just going into this workshop, not having RDM runs in my mind, but just noting all the concerns that the RDM may have with a new way of tackling this. So kind of a few new hands popping up. I think Megan Ware is first and the only one that hasn't spoken yet. So go ahead, Megan.
Thanks, Joe. Much appreciated. If I could ask through you to Adam, just a question on for clarification. I'm looking at the document we had at the December council meeting, and it looks like option 1D was regional for higher measures. So Adam, I'm just trying to better understand, is this motion or your intent to further develop that option, or do you see this as different from option 1D?
Thanks very much. I would see this as further development and or sub options under 1D.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Megan. Good question. I think that also helped with what Chris had just talked about. So see one more hand, Jim Gilmore.
Thanks, Joe. So just a question, and when you brought it up, Joe, about New Jersey being in its own region. So under the regional measures thing, would we be reevaluating regions? Is that a possibility in this, or are we sticking with what we've had in the past? Because I know some of the regions have worked, the regional makeup has worked pretty well. In other cases, maybe not so much. So is there an opportunity to reconsider some of that as we flesh this out?
Okay, I think that is the question that staff can tackle on whether or not that's within scope. So who would like to do that?
I was trying to find my unmute button. So I think the regional configuration under 1D was a question that we had still identified a number of kind of questions about how to handle that. I was trying to pull up the previous document and discussion, but I'm fairly certain that that was something that we had as a question about how to configure the regions and whether they should be the same across species and whether they should be different than the current regions within the current recreational process. So I think that's still an open question, and maybe other staff can chime in if I'm misinterpreting that.
Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. So Jim, I guess there is that discussion, and then, as I mentioned, that is something that the commission has been working with for some time when we're working out our conservation equivalency measures for these species.
Yeah, because Joe, if I may, one thing that concerned me, like the comment I made before, if you've got a state with a significantly larger number of border waters, implementing this, and splitting up for hire from the recreational fishery, whatever, adds a layer of complication. And if you've got those complicated border waters now, and I'll use New Jersey as an example, but not the only one, but essentially, if you split New Jersey on the geographic political boundaries, whatever, it gets more complicated. If you say maybe you took Barnegat Bay south is, one rent, and then north, it simplifies it. So that's just an example of things we may need to look at to make, if we get to the point we are going to implement this, it may work better if we have that latitude to reconsider some of the regional breakups. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. I do see one other hand. Adam, is that a new hand?
Yeah, I just, if I can just touch on Chris's comments about the word develop one more time.
Go ahead.
So I think I would just say that my expectation of the use of the word develop in this context, given all the questions, concerns about RDM, MRIP revisions, workload, etc., is that my intention here would be for develop in this context to essentially be the lowest common denominator that would be required to get this topic on the agenda for conversation at the workshop. That's what the goal is here. Whatever we can do to work towards getting it as developed as possible, great. But the intention here at this point is, again, for it to be the lowest common denominator. What's it going to take to get this topic up for discussion at the workshop? Nicola, some others have brought forward the concept about putting the cart before the horse. No one is trying to usurp the process here. No one is trying to get ahead of it, inject a single idea. The goal here is to make sure we don't get to the workshop, have an idea like this come forward, and then we come back in October and December and say, oh my gosh, we didn't expect this new idea to come forward. We weren't prepared for it. We've got to reset the whole timeline, or we can't do it, etc. That's what we're trying to avoid here. We're simply trying to say this is an idea that had support when we met in December. Let's keep it going, and that would be my intent. Underdevelop, the least amount that we need to do to get this idea to the workshop.
Okay, thank you. That was a very robust discussion from council and commission on the motion, on the draft motion here. So I will look to the public for comments on the motion. Okay. Julie Evans, go ahead, Julie.
Thank you, Joe. As the representative for the East Hampton Town Fisheries Advisory Committee, I would urge the board and the council to move this motion forward. Our for-hire industry has been hoping and waiting and asking for something to prove to be more equitable in these fisheries. So I would support Adam's motion for discussion at this planned workshop. It seems to me that up here, September is a very busy time. Somebody wanted feedback on the timing. It's pretty busy. April would be better for us. And 20 people selected from up and down the coast is not a very large sampling, I don't think. So I'm hoping that you make sure that there are people there that are participants in the for-hire industry and not just people with other opinions. So thank you very much. Please move this forward for discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Julie. See one more hand. Mike Wayne, go ahead, Mike.
I've got a lot of background noise, so hopefully you can hear me. Mike Wayne with the American Sport Fishing Association. It's hard to oppose this motion at this point in the game, but I did want to just say that I share some of the concerns that some of the other board members have about the equity here. And I'll also say that this motion reads as if there are no boundaries in what will be developed. And I think the way that we were approaching this action was that there would be flexibility allowed to the for-hire fleet to establish bag size and season that worked better for their industry and the needs of their customers. But the intent was not for that to be like a free and clear conservation pass. It was that flexibility would come with some sort of trade-off that maintains the conservation ethic that the entire recreational community has to abide by under the setting of quotas and establishing measures that don't exceed those quotas. So I'm kind of struggling how this motion achieves that goal, but perhaps as this gets developed further, that will become more clear in the trade-offs that are offered for this types of flexibility will be a part of this discussion at the workshop. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. Okay, not seeing any other hands. Bob, since the board had this up first, I'll look to you. And I don't know if you have somebody that's going to be calling off states on behalf of the board.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I think what we'll do, since caucusing is a little bit tricky through a virtual meeting, I'll set a timer for 2 minutes for caucusing, then I'll come back and call the question, and I'll read off the states, and if Chelsea and Tracy can help me with the count, that'd be really helpful, and then should be ready to go. So with that, let's do a 2-minute caucus for the board if we can. Okay, that was 2 minutes. Does anyone on the board need more time for caucusing? Raise your hand, please. All right, not seeing any. For the policy board, all those in favor of the motion that's up on the screen, please raise your hand online. 1 vote per state as usual. All right, looks like the hands have settled out here. I've got Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Maine, Maryland, New Hampshire, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. So if you guys could all lower your hands, that would be great. Thank you. And all those in opposition to the motion from the policy board, please raise your hand online. All right, looks like the hands have settled out. We've got Georgia, South Carolina, Massachusetts, Florida, and Delaware. So if you folks could lower your hands.
Mission staff, can you help me out with the count on that one? I lost track. The hands were fluctuating and I lost track.
Yeah, I got 5, Kylie. So 9.
What was the in favor?
9 is what I have.
Thanks.
Okay, are there?
I was voting yes. This is Delaware. I don't think you caught my vote.
Is this Lisa? Lisa, this is just the policy board voting at this point.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no
Thank you.
problem at all. It gets
Good.
confusing, no
I just
problem.
wanted to make sure I was counted if I was allowed. Thank you.
Yep, you'll get a shout out here in a minute, it looks like. And for the board, policy board, are there any abstentions? Not seeing any null votes, NULL for the policy board. All right, not seeing any. The count that I have, and Tracy or Chelsea, please correct me if I'm wrong, is 9 in favor and 5 in opposition with no abstentions or null votes. And I'll turn it over to you, Joe, for a council vote.
Okay, thank you, Bob. So I'll call the question to council members. So Lisa, now's the time. All of those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you for putting that number up there. I was trying to confirm. All of those opposed? Cannot. See. I don't want to double count anyone here. Just not seeing a number from staff. What did we had there?
I thought I had 3 and then it went to 2, so I wasn't sure which was correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
Didn't put my hand down from the last vote, so I
okay.
Just put it
Thank
down.
you, Sam. Okay.
I'm
Gotcha.
sorry, Joe. Paul Reese said he's a yes vote. His internet's in and out bad.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't see Paul's hand. Okay. Thank you, Skip. That appreciate that. So that's going to change that to 17-2. Any abstention?
I'm sorry. Did you see my hand up on the yes? My internet's going in and out.
It is. Yeah, it is, Lisa. So you were counted as one of the abstentions. Is that correct?
No, I'm counted as a yes.
Okay. In favor. So then I believe we have an 18-1 count.
I can hardly hear.
Okay, I think we're set. Thank you for verbally confirming that. Okay, so 18-1 with no abstentions is my count there. So motion passes both board and council. Okay. Keep in mind we don't need motions, but there's still a fair amount that staff is looking for information on. So I don't know if we want to jump back to some of the stuff that we would like feedback on. There we go. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, Joe, we'll just kind of take any feedback that the groups have to offer on any of the tentative plans and any issues, but if there isn't really any, we'll just kind of assume we'll go forward with these plans. So
yeah, that's certainly fair. It did sound like there was some support comfort level with the later timeline and the importance of that. And then, yeah, I think maybe the only other thing I might suggest that would be helpful. Obviously, as we mentioned earlier, having some idea of participants right now would be good if there are, strong preferences or thoughts on that. And I guess the only other thing I was thinking might be helpful is that first suggestion on, maybe leave this up. We'll see if there's hands, but it was one of the earliest slides on the items that staff sees as being covered. That might help form some thoughts on that. And I think there were 4 boxes in that slide. That's the one.
You want the slide up? Yeah, this was.
Yeah, since we didn't see any other hands at the last one, I don't know if this will help at all. If not,
Okay, yeah. And just to reiterate, this was not, intended to be exhaustive. This was just recapping the main questions that were brought up at the December meeting.
Right. Yeah. So I'll give folks a minute there. See if we have any other hands or further discussion on this. Okay, good. Chris Batsavage, go ahead, Chris.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, actually, just going back to the question of workshop participants, the comment was made, I think, by the public that 20 members, when you think about the geographic range and the stakeholders, could get parsed out. However, if you have too many participants, then the workshop can get a little unwieldy. Since I guess we're really looking for stakeholder input from the workshop, I guess the question I have for the policy board and council is, should council and board members be on this, or should we just leave this for stakeholders, including AP members, in that to hear from the public, and then that would help us, decide which way to go forward after that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I appreciate that helping trying to form some discussion around this. So, Anna, if you want to either respond to Chris or you have any other feedback, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with Chris. I don't think any council or board members should be on this. I think this is an opportunity for some of the fishing community to come in and tell us which direction they would like to see. We've had our chance, and we keep kind of jumping up against a wall. So I think we need some fresh perspective on direction.
Nicola, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with that perspective and just wanted to reiterate the importance of having recreational, private recreational angler, shore angler represented. And if it rounds out the participation, I'd be comfortable with going a little bit over 20. I think getting all perspectives is more important than sticking to a strict cap at 20 participants. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nicola. I appreciate that. I guess to that end, and I apologize if this has already been stated in some of the information, but obviously, as folks apply for advisory groups, I think we use different terms. In those applications, they explain their background and why they'd be an appropriate representative. Has that kind of list been put together for these 4 species on the representatives, or if not, that may be of some value to kind of have ready?
Joe, you mean the APs for this group, like the breakdown of the representation?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, we certainly have that information, at least on the council side. I don't have it handy, but yeah, we can definitely look at that.
Great. Yeah, and I know, sure, at the commission level, as I mentioned, that is listed in the applications before the board votes on adding new AP members. I think one of probably the biggest challenges is who amongst them is actually active, but we certainly, I think, could provide lists on both sides for what we know from the applications at least. And that's what I would have been referring to. So thanks, Kylie. Any other thoughts? I was going to say around the table. Any other, any further discussion from folks that should have zeros in front of their name? How about we do it that way? Okay, not seeing any, for better or worse. I think that's all the new stuff you get, the guidance you get from us, Kylie.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And again, thank you to all the staff that's been working on this. With that, we have one more item within this agenda item. I believe, someone could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the next item within is the recreational data collection white paper that we had broken off from the other from the sector separation portion of this. Hayden will be presenting that, I believe.
Yep, and I'm ready to get started whenever you all are.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Go ahead.
All right, is my screen showing up okay?
Yeah, it looks good.
All right, thank you so much. So last but not least, we do have one more item under the rec issues agenda item, which is a review of an outline of a white paper on improvements to recreational data collection and use in the summer flounder, scup, black sea bass, and bluefish fisheries. The objectives for this portion of the meeting are pretty straightforward. Oh, all right, let me see if I can fix my view here.
Aiden, I think you go under display settings. There you go.
Yeah.
Looks good.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, the objectives for this part of the meeting are pretty straightforward. First, we will review the different sections of the draft white paper outline. Then I'll be looking to the Council and Policy Board to provide any feedback they might have on the draft outline. And finally, we'll consider a council staff recommendation regarding the development of the full white paper. And I'll note that this recommendation was not included in the briefing material, so you're not missing anything. This will just be introduced towards the end of this presentation. So before we delve into the content of the white paper outline, let's briefly review how we got here. As the Council and Policy Board are aware, the issue of recreational data collection and use was originally included in the recreational sector separation amendment, but back in April of 2025, the issue was removed from consideration in the amendment due to concerns that the complexity of the issue would cause significant delays in the amendment timeline. And it was also noted that the objectives for addressing enhancements to recreational data collection and use should be more clearly defined. So as a first step, council staff developed a draft white paper outline. This slide is a table of contents for the draft outline. And as you can see on the bottom right-hand corner there, I just provided a visual aid to kind of visualize how I envision the flow of information in the full white paper. We start with some broader background and purpose, and then narrow a little bit to review some relevant recreational data and tools used in stock assessments and management for the 4 fisheries included in this white paper outline. Then we get really narrow to try to refine some species-specific problem statements and objectives for potential future action by the Council and Policy Board. And then we broaden out the discussion a bit to look at any relevant case studies that could provide some insights into the feasibility of different methods to achieve the objectives that are prioritized in this white paper. And then in the final section, that will talk about potential paths forward and may have some recommendations for any next steps for a potential future action or additional analyses that could be needed. So the first section of the white paper would cover relevant background information and lay out the purpose of the document. We just reviewed some of that relevant background, but jumping into the purpose of the white paper, it's listed here as to clarify the key problems to be addressed and define the objectives of a potential future action or other management approach. The terms action and other management approach were used to highlight that depending on the direction of the full white paper, and if some sort of action to improve recreational data collection and use is warranted, the Council and Policy Board may pursue changes that don't necessarily involve an FMP framework or amendment. This section also highlights some preliminary considerations, such as how the scope of potential future action by the Council and Policy Board would not include changes to MRIP estimation methodology itself, and how anticipated revisions to the MRIP fishing effort survey should be accounted for during development of the full white paper. And we'll revisit the latter point there for the Council staff recommendation at the end of the presentation. This next section is an inventory of all recreational data and tools used in the stock assessments and for management in the fluke scup, black sea bass, and bluefish fisheries. For each resource, the outline briefly summarizes survey design, species-specific use cases, and data limitations. And of course, in the outline, you're just barely skimming the surface. And in the full white paper, this discussion will be expanded to include more detailed information, which will be tailored to support any analysis under the next heading of the white paper. And I'll provide an example of what this could look like once we review the next section. The list of recreational data and tools relevant to the summer flounder, scup, black sea bass, and bluefish fisheries is quite extensive, including sources such as MRIP, the Recreation Demand Model, Federal For-Hire EVTR data, the American Littoral Society Tagging Program, State Volunteer Angler Surveys, the Virginia February Black Sea Bass Fishery, and North Carolina headboats sampling data. So this third part is really the core section of the outline, which gets to the purpose of the white paper, which is to clarify key problems to be addressed and define the objectives of a potential future action or other management approach to enhance recreational data collection and use in these fisheries. The topic of improving recreational data collection and use is broad and complex, but thankfully we have some preliminary input from the public and the SSC that highlights some key concerns and objectives that could be further refined in the full white paper. Before we get into some of the specific concerns and potential objectives drawn from preliminary public and SSC input, I want to highlight the original description of the recreational data collection use issue that was provided in the Recreational Sector Separation Amendment scoping document, which was developed for public hearings in spring of 2025. So this statement reads, recreational catch estimation is inherently difficult, and there has been much expressed concern related to the accuracy, precision, and variability of MRIP estimates. For these reasons, there has been interest in exploring options that can improve the collection and or use of recreational data for these species. And looking at specifically the scoping comments, stakeholders identified a wide array of concerns beyond just some concerns about the reliability of MRIP data. So this is just the first half of Table 1, which is provided in the draft white paper outline. And Table 1 summarizes stakeholder identified concerns related to MRIP data and or private recreational data from the March 2025 summary of scoping comments. Based on these concerns, Council staff identified some potential objectives that the Council and Policy Board could consider in the future to enhance recreational data collection and use. For example, this first issue states that there's a high level of uncertainty in MRIP data, particularly when broken down at smaller spatial and temporal scales, which makes it unreliable for use in fisheries management. And it's paired with several potential objectives, including reducing uncertainty in MRIP data for these fisheries through means complementary to MRIP methodology, develop guidelines for use of MRIP data to account for uncertainty, and consider use of supplemental data sources in cases where MRIP data is highly uncertain. This first issue reflects the original problem statement from the amendment scoping document, which referenced general concern about the reliability of MRIP estimates, but scoping comments also highlighted other more nuanced issues. For example, some stakeholders view the lack of private angler reporting as problematic and contributing to uncertainty in recreational catch and effort estimates. And there's also the perspective that it fails to hold private and shore-based anglers accountable for their use of the resource. Along that same line of thought, some stakeholders feel that federal for-hire fishermen are unfairly impacted by uncertainty in MRIP data, given the difference in federal reporting requirements for the private and for-hire sectors, and in some cases, the applicability of the same management measures in federal waters for both parties. In the bottom right-hand cell, it states that this issue may be partially addressed through the ongoing recreational sector separation amendment. The amendment considers options for implementing mode management approaches, which could support the unique needs of the for-hire sector. So if a mode management approach is adopted through the amendment, the concern expressed by some stakeholders regarding the inequitable impact on the for-hire sector from uncertainty in MRIP data may be partially addressed. There were also some concerns specific to for-hire data, particularly that EVTR data is not used to the fullest extent possible in the management process, and that for-hire permitting and reporting requirements differ among states and between state and federal waters. Potential objectives related to these concerns include increasing utilization of federal for-hire EVTR data in the management process, as well as streamlining for-hire permit and reporting requirements for these fisheries in state and federal waters, as well as encouraging compliance with any new or existing requirements. So similar to what I noted on the last slide, the recreational sector separation amendment considers options for modifying for-hire permitting and reporting requirements at the state and or federal levels. This means that the objective of streamlining for-hire permit and reporting requirements could be addressed through the amendment, and including them in the full white paper may be redundant. Another resource referenced in the white paper outline is the July 2025 SSC meeting report. At their July 2025 SSC meeting, the Mid-Atlantic Council's SSC developed acceptable biological catch recommendations for fluke, scup, black sea bass, and bluefish. And as part of this process, the SSC addressed several terms of reference for each species, which included identifying the most significant sources of scientific uncertainty associated with determination of DOFL, or total catch for bluefish, and the ABC. And another term of reference was research or monitoring recommendations that would reduce the scientific uncertainty in the ABC recommendation and or improve the assessment level. There were various sources of scientific uncertainty for each stock that were highlighted by the SSC in this report. There were also several research and monitoring recommendations made pertaining to recreational data, and these recommendations differ by species. Table 2 in the draft white paper outline only highlights those sources of scientific uncertainty and recommendations related to recreational data. And similar to the last table we went through, Table 2 is going to be split up into two parts just because I wanted to make sure the text wasn't too small. The SSC highlighted that recalibrated MRIP estimates could change our understanding of stock status and uncertainty in recreational catch for several stocks. While this wasn't explicitly listed as one of the most significant sources of scientific uncertainty for scup, the report states that revised effort estimates will affect all stocks with recreational fisheries, but the effects will not be uniform, owing to interactions with the angler intercept surveys over waves and regions. The other source of uncertainty listed here for summer flounder is uncertainty in recreational catch and discard estimates from MRIP, especially for 2020 when some data were imputed. The report did not include any research or monitoring recommendations related to this issue. And while nothing specific to recreational data was listed as a significant source of scientific uncertainty for scup, there was a recommendation to improve estimates of discards and discard mortality for commercial and recreational fisheries, which indicates that uncertainty may arise from recreational discard and discard mortality estimates. Similar to the last slide, the red boxes here highlight where MRIP calibration is noted as a major source of scientific uncertainty for both black sea bass and bluefish. There are also some differences and sources of uncertainty highlighted for these stocks. For example, it was noted that there are few length samples for discarded recreational black sea bass, with some samples for headboats. Aside from MRIP calibration, the sources of uncertainty noted for bluefish include the estimate of recreational discard mortality and the potential for hyperstability and the recreational catch per unit effort index that can mask signals in the status of the stock. There are several recommendations related to these sources of uncertainty, ranging from the general recommendation next to black sea bass that states anything that reduces uncertainty in MRIP catch estimates to improved or increased sampling of recreational discard length for black sea bass and bluefish. And bluefish also had 2 research and monitoring recommendations, including topics such as potential for guild level catch per unit effort estimates from MRIP to mask bluefish signals and the potential for hyperstability and recreational catch. So this, I mentioned earlier that I would provide an example of how the white paper outline would actually operate to refine the problem statements and objectives. So here we're going to use an SSC identified issue and recommendation regarding black sea bass to walk through a hypothetical example of what this white paper could actually look like. So first we'll use the referenced SSC input to craft a potential problem statement and objective. The problem statement reads, there are few length samples for discarded recreational black sea bass, which contributes to uncertainty in estimates of discards in weight. And then there's the objective, which reads, improve sampling for the length composition of recreational black sea bass discards to better inform stock assessments and management. Then, to provide a specific diagnosis of the issue at hand, council staff will conduct targeted analysis in the full white paper to refine these statements. For black sea bass, information on recreational release size information comes from the American Littoral Society tagging program, state volunteer angler surveys, and MRIP headboat sampling. Data from these sources could be analyzed to show, for example, the proportion of data from each source and potential spatial or temporal gaps in coverage, or to characterize the level of uncertainty added to stock assessments due to uncertainty in this data. Then the problem statement and objective would be revised to reflect the specific issues revealed through analysis of the relevant data outlined here. This section of the white paper is focused on refining the problem statements and objectives for, the last section of the white paper, focused on refining the problem statements and objective for potential future action. And the case study section goes a step further to explore potential methods of achieving whatever objectives are refined in the full white paper. I really want to emphasize that the methods and objectives are 2 separate things, and the exploration of methods will come after issues are prioritized by the Council and Policy Board. So I think that of this section is kind of a placeholder in the draft white paper outline that will really be molded by whatever issues and related objectives are prioritized in the previous section. Going back to our hypothetical black sea bass example, let's say the Council and Policy Board decided to prioritize the objective of improving sampling for the length composition of recreational black sea bass discards. One example of ongoing efforts to improve recreational discard estimates in another region is a series of IRA-funded projects. $20 million of IRA funding was allocated to the Department of Commerce for red snapper and other reef fish in the southeastern United States. And the funding is intended to be used to explore and test improvements to state and federal recreational fishery surveys. NO Fisheries and the Gulf States Marine Fisheries Commission held 2 workshops in 2024 to develop work plans and budgets for these projects. And the second workshop focused specifically on the improvement of recreational discard estimates from state and federal surveys. Council staff could draw ideas from this workshop to begin exploring potential paths forward for black sea bass. Similarly, the recreational biological sampling program could be reviewed as an example of a cooperative research program to collect more biological data, including discard composition data to support stock assessments. Finally, based on the previous sections, council staff will outline potential next steps to enhance recreational data collection and use in the fluke, scup, black sea bass, and bluefish fisheries, if appropriate. Depending on the findings of the white paper, this could include additional analysis, initiation of a management action, or implementation of a management approach or recommendations to other management partners like NOAA Fisheries. Looking ahead to next steps, there are two options that require input from the Council and Policy Board. First, the white paper outline can be revised as needed to reflect the range of priority issues that the Council and Policy Board are interested in exploring further. Second, the development of the full white paper could be postponed or proceed as planned. If the Council and Policy Board decide to move forward with developing the full white paper, Council staff would work through 2026 to do so, collaborating with Commission and NOAA Fisheries staff as needed. At this point, there are plans to refine the alternatives considered under the Recreational Sector Separation Amendment through additional public hearings, and the impacts of revisions to the MRIP Fishing Effort Survey have not been realized. So the context in which improvements to recreational data collection and use would be considered is changing. And specifically, the overlap noted here on the bottommost bullet point of the slide alludes to the fact that if for-hire permitting and reporting requirements are modified at the state or federal levels through the amendment, that new framework would have some bearing on the methods considered to address recreational data collection and use issues. Also, if the white paper includes analysis of MRIP data, it may be wise to wait until recalibrated MRIP estimates are released to ensure those changes are accounted for in the analysis. Given this uncertainty, Council staff recommend postponing the development of the full white paper until calibrated MRIP estimates have been released and the range of alternatives under the Recreational Sector Separation Amendment is approved for public hearings. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions, and I also have prepared some questions to help out with the discussion. And I'll note that while any and all feedback is welcome on the draft outline, the second set of questions here is geared toward identifying priority issues and objectives given the wide range of topics that could be included in the full white paper. So that is all I have, Mr. Chair. I'll turn it back to you.
Great, thank you, Hayden. I appreciate that. So let's start with questions from council or board members. Well, hands are slow to come up, Hayden. So appreciate you putting up some discussion questions. Well, then I will use this for a chance for me to ask a question here. You had something on guidelines for data usage. Either if you could. Yeah. So I don't know, sorry. So the level of uncertainty we often talk in terms of PSEs, I'll just say from experience as and this may have been mentioned at least among staff, but as the commission moved forward with guidelines on conservation equivalency proposals that focused on PSEs, I think one of the questions about it is that those states that have much larger fisheries may have lower PSEs and be able to reach a threshold in data usage that it doesn't exist for other states. So I think that's just something I would note as that goes forward. And that point on the potential objectives may not be strictly looking at PSEs, but there is that disparity that exists for
part of the state is breaking away. Specifically, 14 counties in Eastern Oregon have GM3
Okay, so still looking around at the board and council, I'm still not seeing any hands. Bob, you have your hand up? Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I think, first of all, Hayden, thanks for the presentation and all the helpful background. It helps characterize the issue. But I guess maybe a question for the board is, at this point, do you agree with the staff idea of postponing this until we learn more about the FES and a number of other things that are sort of in play right now with recreational, data collection and recreational fisheries. So maybe that's the fundamental question first. And then if, the board doesn't agree and wants to move forward and the council agrees, then, focus on the second set of questions here, which are, tackle priorities and what should we ask staff to focus on.
Thanks for additional help, Bob. I see Jason McNamee's hand. Go ahead, Jay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to answer Bob's direct question there. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm always like hesitant to delay stuff because I think it's sometimes like an easy thing to do, and I don't know, the arc of this stuff sometimes is like epic. So I'm usually not a fan of that, but in this case, you've got this kind of fundamental element that's changing, and so I do think it is warranted to kind of wait a little. Stuff is starting to pop now, so we'll kind of have more information soon that we can synthesize and then continue on, and that might be like one of the things to offer now, moving away from that direct response to Bob's question and adding like some other things that might be contemplated by the white paper, and that is when it comes to MRIP, there's this interesting challenge where I'm actually really happy about the fact that they continue to look at the survey, look at the elements of the survey, improve them, try to get better. Like, we should be happy about that and encourage that, but it does create problems on the back end when we're trying to manage things. And so, the question there is there some optimal cycle for kind of reviewing these things? And rather than, right now it's just kind of happening in a non-systematic way, I think, in my view anyways. And so maybe there's a systematic way to kind of revisit the survey, think about, new ways of making it better, and it can happen on a cycle that will be like less disruptive, because then you can map in assessment schedules and things like that. So that could be something else that's kind of contemplated in the white paper. And then one other, just while I have the mic, one other thing, and I apologize if it's kind of tucked in to one of these elements, and or maybe you even said it very directly and I just missed it. But one of the things that I've brought up at a couple of different venues in the past, we have these different data elements that we're collecting, volunteer angler surveys, and there's all kinds of stuff out there. And I like the idea of looking at that. How can we incorporate it in a way, like, we understand that there could be biases and all these things, but how do we incorporate it? But one idea that I thought is similar to those types of data sources, but could be more controlled and planned, is like a recreational study fleet. And, you kind of develop this recreational study fleet. It could be, up and down the coast. And you use the data that they generate. And so they're kind of a known group. They know to report, they have the capacity to report and things like that. We'll kind of understand the attributes of their fishing habits. And, so that would give us a way to kind of inform parameters in MRIP or whatever it is. So this notion of a recreational study fleet is the concept that I wanted to kind of offer as something else that could be, talked about in the white paper. And I brought this up during, I can't remember what it was. It was like some big meeting that was like I don't know, it was the councils and the commission, all sorts of folks. It was a year or two ago. And I brought this up and I thought it had a little traction. So there may be something out there on this that the folks that are developing the white paper could look to get a little information. So that's it for me. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. I don't know if anyone, I don't know if it would even be the Science Center that you're thinking of, Jay, that may have responded. I know there was some work being proposed there for a rec study fleet. I'm not seeing any other hands. I did see one go up and down. So, okay, there we go. I drew out that hand. Doug, go ahead, Doug.
I just wanted to say that I would concur with the notion of postponing this at this point in particular time, that I would support that, but that's all.
Okay, well, thanks. And I feel like Bob kind of specifically asked that to board members. Erica Burgess. Erica, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for recognizing me. I would also like to state my support for postponing this. I do have to get off this call at 4 promptly, so I wanted to make sure that my position was clear. Thank you.
Very good, Erica. Thank you. I appreciate that, and I'm hopeful that we can still make that deadline for you. So, without a lot of other hands offered, I might flip the question to council, and unless there's any objection to postponing, if you do object, I would like to see any hands. If not, I think that would be a suggestion that that's the direction we should go in here. And I do see one hand from the public as well. So, okay, I'm not seeing any objections. So, but I will give Kate Wilkie, I'll give you a chance. Go ahead, Kate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kate Wilkie with the Nature Conservancy. I did have one question and then a follow-up comment, if you'll allow me. The question is, Hayden, I hear you say that one of the reasons for possibly postponing is due to the changes that we expect to come down from the MRIP survey, the effort survey. And I thought that I saw early on in your slides that the intent of the options in this white paper were not to delve into MRIP specific data or survey issues. Did I misunderstand? I can't recall exactly what that bullet was in your slide.
Yeah, you're correct, Kate, and I can clarify what I meant by that a little bit. So essentially what I meant in that bullet point was that if the council and policy board in the future were to consider initiating some sort of management action, actually changing the MRIP estimation methodology itself would not be within their purview, because MRIP is a national level program and NOAA Fisheries leads the development and implementation of that methodology. However, I guess something that would be within the scope of a future action would be providing feedback and input to NOAA Fisheries regarding that program, but actually changing how it operates, directly from the council and policy board would not be a feasible approach.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that clarification. And so, and I think that makes sense. I think that there are a lot of different things that this white paper could look into, specific, shortcomings of MRIP. And that's one of the reasons that I've been supportive of this white paper being done. And I was, pleased to see the outline that you came up with and see this progress made. So, I would love to see this continue on and not be delayed. But I do understand that the council has other priorities going on. I don't think that we should use the MRIP changes as a reason or excuse to not pursue some of these other items. And I will have specific recommendations for items that we would like to see move forward in the paper. I just don't have those for you right now, so I'll provide that in a comment after the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. I appreciate that. You know, I know during this process, we've talked about that this is a national issue and that there are other work going on in some other areas as well. You know, mentioned the Gulf on several occasions, but just there's also technology that's moving forward that might really help with what's happening with volunteer data, including measurements and other ways of getting at discard estimates for the recreational fishery. So perhaps, you know, postponing this will also advance on how this may move forward in the future. So I don't see any other hands. So we may just be moving on from this for now with an understanding that there will be a postponement. I would recommend to staff to start calling this the draft Mr. White Paper. You can include the Heisenberg stencil on the cover of it, and I'll see when it comes knocking again. Yeah, I'm not really sure where else to go with this, but like I said, I do have hope that the technology and other folks attempting to tackle this as well may help us move this forward in the future. So I believe that was the last item for the agenda item. It's the last agenda item for us as a joint group. I checked in with Bob. I know that the board does not have any other business to come before us. So I think at this time we could, unless Hayden, you had anything else you wanted to follow up with us?
No, I think I have everything I need for now.
Yeah, best we can do. Yeah. Okay. So I am going to look to Chris, but I do believe that we could adjourn as a joint group. Bob, as I mentioned, Bob said that there's no other business before the policy board. Chris, is there any announcements you need to make before the council adjourns until tomorrow?
Not today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Very good. Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate this. I know sometimes it's difficult virtually, but I think we had fantastic participation. And though there were a few technical issues for folks, I hope that everyone was heard. And I think it was a very good day. So I appreciate all of that. We will be adjourning then as a council, and we will pick it up.